Hello, English 285. I hope everybody's well. Man, we are past Thanksgiving and we are in the last few weeks of school here. So that's a great thing for everyone, I assume. I hope everybody's doing okay and is healthy and all of that stuff. I hope if you have questions or problems about anything related to the class, that you'll get in touch with me and let me know, and I'll be happy to try to help you out. Um, You've got a short story due on Friday. You've got another short story due the next Friday. Both of those about 5 pages long. I put some of the details of those in the previous announcement, so you can check that out. Uh, I wanted to spend a few minutes today looking at this short story Cathedral by Raymond Carver, just as an example, another example of the arc of a storyline of problem and rising action and climax. And then I also wanted to look at it in terms of, as we looked at A Good Man is Hard to Find, we saw the family go out on a journey. And that's one of the things I mentioned in class, that we sort of basically have two sort of stories in life. We've got going out for an adventure, and we've got coming home. But I want to point out that going out and that coming home can be metaphorical and doesn't have to be literal, right? So in Good Man is Hard to Find, it's quite literal. They go on an adventure in a car off somewhere. Here we've got a coming home story, but the person who's coming home is already at home. So, right, so it's not a literal coming home so much as it is a metaphorical coming home. And so, anyway, I just wanted to point out a few things about this story by Raymond Carver. If you can, I sent you a link to the story. If you pull that up, I just want to look roughly the way that we looked at Good Man is Hard to Find. I want to look at the first paragraph and I want to look at the ending, or maybe the first two paragraphs, and then look at the ending, especially, and talk about the problem and the climax, etc. If you can, grab that and pull that up. Cathedral by Raymond Carver. I don't know if y'all know who Raymond Carver is, but he was a terrific writer, and died sometime in the 80s there, not. And at any rate, both wrote poetry and short stories, etc. Most famous as a short story writer. Cathedral. So let's just start by looking at these first lines here. For one thing, this blind man, an old friend of my wife's, he was on his way to spend the night. Okay, so a couple of things here. One, we automatically know here that we've got first person narrator, right? We're being told this story by a guy who's got a wife, and his wife has got a friend. And so we know first person narrator. Now, when we read A Good Man is Hard to Find, we had sort of omniscient narrator who knew what was sort of going on in everybody's head, and could describe what was happening. Here we've got the first person narrator who is going to tell us the story, but there's always a subtext when there's a first person narrator, and that is the story that they are telling you without meaning to tell you. So the way that they're involved with the story in such a way as to where they might not realize all of the information that they are giving to you. So, for instance, in this first sentence, this blind man, an old friend of my wife, he was on his way to spend the night. His wife had died, so he was visiting his dead wife's relatives in Connecticut. He called my wife from his in-laws. Arrangements were made. He would come by train, a 5-hour trip, and my wife would meet him at the station. She hadn't seen him since they worked for him one summer in Seattle 10 years ago. But she and the blind man had kept in touch. They made tapes and mailed them back and forth. I wasn't enthusiastic about his visit. He was no one I knew. And his being blind bothered me. My idea of blindness came from the movies. In the movies, the blind moved slowly and never laughed. Sometimes they were led by seeing eye dogs. A blind man in my house was not something I would look forward to. Okay, so just want to point out here, one, what is the problem in this short story? Well, we already know. I would say almost in the first sentence, we know what the problem is. This blind man, an old friend of my wife's, he was on his way to spend the night. If you're married and you have a wife, the idea of jealousy gets involved here. You can tell, though, not just by that first sentence, but in the first few sentences. See how short the sentences are? His wife had died. So he was visiting his dead wife's relatives in Connecticut. He called my wife from his in laws. Arrangements were made. He would come by train, a 5 hour trip. She would pick him up at the station. I wasn't enthusiastic about his visit. He was no one I knew. Okay? And so I want to point out all of these short sentences from this narrator, we get, even by the time he gets to, I wasn't enthusiastic about his visit, we already know that he's not enthusiastic about the visit. We can tell by the shortness and the way that he's talking. We can tell by the way that he keeps referring to the blind man as the blind man. Why does the blind man not have a name? And the idea that he is sort of focused on the guy's blindness, like his idea of blindness comes from movies, and so he's got a stereotypical idea of what he thinks a blind man is, and he can't seem to get past that. I mean, he keeps referring to him as the blind man, and so we already see what the problem is. A dude who isn't terribly tolerant, who isn't terribly open-minded. His wife is inviting an old friend over to their house. And so we've got jealousy involved. We've got issues of like friendship and how do those work in marriages and with other people, etc. We know that something has to be solved here immediately. There's a problem. The person's coming. So what's going to happen when the old friend meets the new husband? Are they going to fight and one of them kill the other one, and then that's the end of the story? Are they going to come together and become best friends? Right? Is that going to be the end of the story? But something has to happen between them, right? And we know that something's going to happen. As it turns out, what happens is by the end of this story, the narrator, who starts out being a jerk, who is prejudiced against blind people and black people and other people for that matter, we see him by the end of this story, he's going to make a connection to the blind man. So instead of ending up fighting, they're going to end up coming together some. And that's going to be our resolution, right? So we go immediately from the problem is in the first sentence, in the first paragraph, we know what the problem is. And again, the narrator is already revealing stuff to us that he doesn't necessarily mean to reveal. So for instance, no doubt, he does not mean to reveal in the first paragraph that he's a jerk. But I think he's already starting to reveal that, right? By the way that he's treating the blind man. And by the, it's all focused on him. You know, this guy's coming to my house. It's not really about, oh, my wife gets to see a friend for a long time ago and I get to meet him and that'll be exciting because I care about her and blah, blah. No, it's all about, man, I got a blind dude coming to my house and I don't want it. And so, at any rate, we know immediately what the problem is and we know what needs to be resolved here. Okay? And so then the rest of this, so from the very beginning, we know the problem. Already when we get into the second paragraph, we are now into the rising action. In the rising action, we learn about the history of the wife and Robert, the blind man, who does in fact, right, have a name. We learn about their history. We learn about how they met, how they got to know each other a little bit. In the meantime, we learn a little bit about how the relationship between the husband and the wife in the house here. I think very quickly we realize that relationship isn't the greatest. Again, I'm not sure the narrator means to reveal that, but when he says stuff like, anyway, this man who first enjoyed her favors, this officer-to-be, he'd been her childhood sweetheart. So, okay. I'm saying that at the end of the summer, he let the blind man run her hands over her face, said goodbye to him, married her childhood, etc., who is now a commissioned officer, and she moved away from Seattle. But they keep in touch, and she and the blind man. And again, I think we can tell here by the way that he's talking about it. He is not open and excited about his wife's relationship. He's a little freaked out by the idea that the blind man touches her face, which is fair enough, right? We don't usually touch the faces of people that we're not close to. And, you know, so if some guy's touching my wife's face, I might feel a little funny about that too. Though I would like to think that I would understand, okay, well, this is the way that he can quote unquote see. I can appreciate that. It seems like to me here the husband does not appreciate that. So then we go through, again, we learn about their relationship some. One, we learn that the wife is concerned that her husband drinks too much. She's afraid he might already be drunk, and they haven't even got him over. We haven't even got Robert over to the house yet. We see. Right. We see other things here. I'm sorry about him and the wife. We see their sort of contentious relationship as they're sort of arguing a little bit about Robert. And so all of this is again building to what's going to be the climax. And again, we got to get Robert over to the house. So before long in that rising action, Robert shows up. And as part of that rising action, Robert eats dinner with them, and they chow down, and they have a bunch of food, and they have drinks. And this whole time that they're having drinks, the narrator is noting stuff that Robert does, and noting how his wife treats Robert because he's concerned about all that stuff, right? You might say that the narrator is insecure. I think he's insecure, right? I think we can tell that he is concerned that his wife, he is concerned that he might have reason to be jealous, right? And so we have all this rising action, which then ultimately leads to them all sitting on the couch, smoking pot, drinking. Um, One of the things we see here is a lot of drinking. This might be a problem. On the other hand, right, the fact that they're so drunk by the end of the story might be sort of the social lubricant, yeah, you know, as alcohol is, that sort of helps them make a connection. Same with smoking pot here. But of course, another way of looking at about that is that the narrator and everyone here is sort of trying to escape the reality of the situation. I don't know. So at any rate, so he and the blind man talk, and this leads to them watching TV and watching a show about a cathedral. They have to end up. The blind man has him draw the cathedral, and in doing so, he and the blind man have to work together on this drawing. And the narrator, I think, sees by the end of the story that the blind man is a cool dude. For one thing, he's open. We can see this throughout the story. He's open to smoking pot, even though he's not. He's open to watching whatever on TV. He's open to doing what. He's a open-minded kind of guy. And the narrator is not that. And by the end of the story, the narrator has his eyes opened. Ready? Has his eyes opened a little bit by the blind man, right? So you see at the end of the story the sort of reversal that's gone on. Robert's the blind guy, but it turns out Robert sees the world a lot better and a lot more clearly than the narrator, who has sight. And at the end of the story, the narrator finally gets to a point of sort of learning something only when he closes his eyes, right? So we get this nice little reversal here that's taking place. And so we get this at the very end. We see, I'm going to say that the climax of this story might be when they sort of start drawing the cathedral, but I'm going to say it's when they're drawing the cathedral and we get right near the end, and the blind man says, Robert says, it's all right to, he says this to the wife, close your eyes now, the blind man said to me, the narrator. I did. I closed them just like he said. Are they closed? He said. Don't fudge. They're closed, I said. Which is to say, don't fudge. Tell me the truth. And he tells him the truth. Okay, keep them that way, he said. Don't stop. Draw. So we kept on with it. His fingers rode my fingers as my hand went over the paper. It was like nothing else in my life up till now. Then he said, I think that's it. I think you got it. He said, take a look. What do you think? But I had my eyes closed. I thought I'd keep them that way for a little longer. I thought it was something I ought to do. Well, he said, are you looking? My eyes were still closed. I was in my house. I knew that, but I didn't feel like I was inside anything. It's really something, I said. And that's it. Okay, so where is the climax here? I would argue that the climax is right near the end. Maybe it's when they start drawing the cathedral. I think it's probably more, to me, it's like everything in this story gets solved at the moment that the narrator says that he's keeping his eyes closed. Because he's keeping his eyes closed means that he's letting faith work, right? He's putting faith in someone else. And in this case, putting faith in someone who, not long before this, he had bad feelings about. So we see the narrator move from being a jerk to being a little bit more of a understanding guy at the end. We see Robert is the thing that makes him change. And we see here it's really something I said. I mean, it's possible that it's really something I said could just be what we call the resolution, right? I mean, that's it. My eyes were still closed. I didn't feel like I was inside anything. We could call that the climax. The point is the climax is right near the end. The other thing I want to mention, I'm trying to keep this short, people, sorry. The other thing that I wanted to mention is just for you to think about the symbolism going on in this story. For instance, they're watching TV and they see this show about the cathedral. And of course, as a plot, they need to be watching something on TV that is big and complicated enough to where the blind man doesn't know what it is and he has to be drawn a picture of it. But it seems like to me that thing that they could be watching on TV could be about anything, right? That is sufficiently complicated that the blind man might not understand. So, perhaps it's like what it looks like inside of a submarine, or designing a nuclear facility, or blah blah blah. It could be any number of things, but Raymond Carver chooses it to be a show about cathedrals. And again, it could be a show about anything, but it's a show about cathedrals. And so I would like you to think about, well, why is a show about cathedrals important as opposed to some other thing? And obviously cathedral is really important because he makes that the title of the story. So you get what I'm saying here? It doesn't have to be that they see a story on cathedrals. That's something Raymond Carver chooses it to be. But why does he choose that to be? Well, you think about that. I have my ideas. It seems like to me, for instance, cathedrals are places where people meet. Cathedrals are places where people are supposed to have transcendent experiences. But cathedrals are places that take long time to build and many people effort over time. Maybe the same way understanding takes place between people with major differences or minor differences for that matter. Okay, people, a lot of stuff in this story. Really cool story, fun to read. Just want to mention here, the narrator, the story is about him, right? And he starts at home and he ends up at home. But I'm going to say metaphorically, his mind has been on an adventure in some bad place. And metaphorically, he comes home to some sense of goodness, some sense of connecting to other people, some sense of reality about himself, some understanding about himself. So it's sort of an internal journey, not an external journey. Right? Make sense? I hope so. Man, this video is much longer than I intended it to be, but I hope y'all forgive me. Remember to get in touch with me if you got questions about anything. Leave comments on this video for participation points. I'm sorry the video's a day late. I hope everybody's well and stays safe and all of that stuff, people. I'll be in touch soon. Take care. Bye.